So, there's a little more to Dunbar's little prayer there, as far as where it came from. But it also, in it, if you go back to the text of it, it says, looking back to the Massachusetts Bay, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, all these original charters as being Christian, and they certainly were, but that is exactly was the problem that the Connecticut Danbury Baptists wrote Jefferson about in their letter to him that he replied to. They called it their ancient charter, and the persecution they were under because of their ancient charter, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut and Connecticut's charter. And that's what prompted Jefferson to write his separation of church and state letter.
Well, so and then he's taking all of this out of context to support this Christian nation.
Right.
We've got limited time here, so what are some of the most egregious misrepresentations that you've stumbled on that Barton, well, by the way, his education has been in theology, isn't it?
He does have a doctorate. He's an honorary doctorate from Pensacola Christian College or Christian University or whatever. So he now calls himself a professor because he can call himself Dr. David Barton with his honorary doctorate from Pensacola Christian College. I believe his other degree was in religious education from Oral Roberts.
Yeah, I thought it was Oral Roberts also.
Yeah, I believe it was. Yes, and then I think he worked at his father's Christian high school or something.
Okay, so this is the man who, well, at least one of them, but he's the expert consultant to this Board of Education. Right. And what are some of these misrepresentations, that he's made?
Well, there was one that you had mentioned when we were speaking on the phone earlier, the big one that every presentation on the Glenn Beck show, his tours of the Capitol, is that Aitken Bible, where his claim that the first Bible, English Bible in America, was printed by Congress, and he whips this thing out. There's only 10 of them left in the world, and he owns one, and all of that. That is a complete, utter, total lie. Congress did not print that Bible, and Barton knows this. Okay, Robert Aitken was a printer in Philadelphia. He had actually been at one time the printer to the Continental Congress. Okay? During the Revolutionary War, of course, the Bibles being imported from England was stopped because of the war. And in the around 1780, he started printing the first full Bible. He had printed New Testaments before, the first full Bible. Aitken kept asking Congress for stuff. I mean, this guy was basically a pest, okay? And he wanted to be the official Bible printer for the United States, the authorized Bible printer. His Bibles were going to be for the use of schools. But this is all stuff from him to Congress. But Barton cites these things as they're in the records of Congress, that it was a Bible for the use of schools. Okay? Yeah, it's in the record of Congress because any petition or memorial that someone wrote to Congress, whether they granted it, enacted it, did anything with it, are in the record. Okay? So Congress did not commission him to print them, request him to print them for the use of schools, contract them to any of the number of various versions of this lie that are out there. All they did was he had one of his requests was that the chaplains of Congress examine his work for accuracy, which they did. And then they passed a resolution saying that based on the chaplain's report of the accuracy, they would recommend that edition of the Bible to people who wanted to buy Bibles. That was their sole involvement. Now, what ended up happening and why this is such a rare book, okay, this thing, I looked one up on the internet, there was one up for auction, $150,000, this one book that Barton owns, which will give you an idea how much money this guy has. Lost my train of thought there a little bit, but the reason it's such a rare book is because apparently there really wasn't the demand for Bibles that Aitken anticipated, even though we had been without a supply of Bibles for like 7 years. So nobody was buying them. So most of them ended up getting destroyed. They sat around in a warehouse for a while, and Aitken made a couple of attempts to get Congress to buy them from him. The first one was to distribute, Congress buy them to distribute to the states. They turned them down flat. And then right at the end of the war, when the actual fighting had stopped, but the treaty hadn't been signed yet, in that period of time, Aitken made one last-ditch effort by having a prominent minister friend of his, write to George Washington, asking Washington not only to endorse this plan, but for him to recommend it to Congress that they buy Aitken's Bibles to give to soldiers as gifts as they were being discharged. Okay? Mm. Of course, George Washington turned that down politely. So anyway, these Bibles ended up Aitken lost his ruffled shirt. I mean, he sat in a warehouse or his print shop or whatever for a time and then were destroyed. So there's only something like 20 or whatever of these things left in the world now. So then when Washington became president after the Constitution was signed, now we're talking 7 years later, Aitken is the person who actually started the lies that Barton is using now. Aitken wrote to George Washington and blamed his financial woes on Congress, lying that Congress solicited his printing of the Bibles and he lost all this money on them, so George Washington should get him the job as printer to Congress. So Washington politely had Washington didn't respond personally. He politely had Tobias Lear, his secretary, send Aitken a letter saying, well, if you want the job as printer to Congress, you got to ask Congress. So the lies about Aitken's Bible actually go all the way back to Robert Aitken himself.
Oh my! And you've got a lot of this on your site, right?
Yes, actually, the entire chapter. It's chapter 1 of my book. I have a few chapters available, either as PDFs or I serialized some of them on Talk to Action. The one about the Treaty of Tripoli is on Talk to Action. There's links to it on my site, and there's also a download of the entire Congress and the Bible. There are various stories like this. That's chapter 1 of the book, free PDF, if anyone wants to download it.